Welcome to Rational Alchemy. Or maybe today we should be calling this rational science. Or maybe rational fracking. Rational fracking, I like that. Let's stick with rational fracking for this particular program. I've got a very special guest with me today, Gbenga Ajiboye. Gbenga is actually running for the 48th district in Weld County. And he wants to get into the politics for a very specific reason. Before we get into all of that, because it's absolutely fascinating, Gbenga, why don't you introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background history about what made you end up in Colorado?
So my name is Gbenga Ajiboye. I'm running for the House District 48 as a Democrat. And I came into this country not affiliated to any kind of business, but I'm an engineer. So I moved to Texas because I figured that's where the best of my academic achievement can be put in place. Then I decided to work for slavery. That moved me to Louisiana. So I worked there for a while before the crash in 2009. Then moved to Iowa to study, have some further studies. Then after I was done, then I got another job with Baker Hughes in the oil industry, and they moved me to Colorado. And I decided to move in here. I lived in Weld County, which is in Johnstown. And ever since I've been picking particular interests in the locality because of my chemical engineering background and the love for the environment.
So where did you study?
I studied, my first degree was in Lagos State University in Nigeria. I had my first graduate school in Prairie View A&M University in Texas. And I have another degree, a graduate studies degree in the University of Iowa, in Iowa City.
Let's get down to the nitty-gritty now about what you want to talk about.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about this particular topic, and also it's probably not advertised to the general public. So, for instance, I bet you didn't know that out of a well, any well, you're probably going to get methane, which we all know about, but also ethane, propane, and butane. These are all of the gases that are associated with drilling. Over and above that, you can also get pentane, hexane, heptane, and octane. However, they're not an issue when it comes to locally where they drill. Those only become an issue at the oil refinery that they decided to build in the middle of Denver, or rather haven't moved from the middle of Denver. 94% basically of the gas that comes out of a well is methane. What's the issue?
So the thing with methane is we all have probably heard about it because we use it as a good cooking gas. But when those gas is in a place where it should not be, it becomes a problem. For example, everybody know about global warming. We know what the input of carbon dioxide does. But what people don't really pay attention to is in the atmosphere, methane is actually, it has more effect to the global warming potential than carbon dioxide.
So it's more of a greenhouse gas?
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and such that if we want to compare apple to apple, if you take methane and CO2 into the atmosphere, CO2, we all know, what it does is it traps heat and it increases the global temperature.
Yes.
Even though we need some of it, we don't need too much of it. Likewise is methane. If methane goes into the atmosphere, it traps heat even more than the carbon dioxide. Such that in 100 years, methane will trap heat 28 times more than carbon dioxide. Then in 20 years, it will trap heat 104 times more than carbon dioxide. So we don't want methane in our atmosphere. Beyond that, it has other effects, such that we all know about the house explosion in Firestone. The biggest component of the explosion is methane. If you find it in your basement, and if it's in the right concentration, your house can blow up and people can die. Everybody know about the incidents in Firestone. And it has other because we can't say.
Sorry, were you involved in the Firestone incident at all?
Yes, I was.
Oh, so
I can't
were you
go,
one of the investigators?
Yeah, I'm one of the investigators, but I can't go into detail.
No, I understand, because they want to keep it...
For good reasons, but I was really there from day one, and I saw what happened.
Yes, that was a tragedy.
Yeah, it is, and it shouldn't happen. One good reason is if I get elected, those are the kind of issues I want to be proactive about.
Well, you have to be proactive in situations like that.
Yes.
I mean, if you know there is an issue, then you can fix it. I'm trying to find something comparable. It's not really like the Flint water fiasco, where they didn't really know they had a problem until they started looking at it in depth.
The extent of the problem was what was not known.
Oh, really?
Until the house exploded.
Ah.
But not to scare you, there's a lot of such potentials that still exist in Weld County.
Oh, so I need to go home and open my windows in the basement.
You need to know more than just opening your window.
I know I do. Let's look a little bit now about what's been happening in history. Methane in the atmosphere, post-industrial. Pre-industrial, post-industrial. So why don't we go through a little bit of that, just to show people what is actually happening to our atmosphere.
So let's say pre-industrial revolution, that's before we discover oil and gas and before we have all these machineries. The biggest source of methane was through the cow. And we, human, when we fart, we produce methane. Unfortunately, people don't know that, but we are a very good source. But that's natural source, and manures when things decay, when trees decay. So before the Industrial Revolution, the quantity of methane that we have in the atmosphere was 722 parts per billion carbon. That's what our great-great-grandparents, that's what they lived with. So come with the Industrial Revolution, that number increased. And up to 2018, globally, we have 1,850 parts per billion carbon. Globally, that's the global concentration. And that concentration is scary enough to the scientists that they are beginning to look at it. And currently, because EPA doesn't look succinctly at methane as a greenhouse gas, they are beginning to, try to have that under their radar. And currently, with the administration we have, they think regulation is not important. We just left the Paris agreement.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid we might not be taking that as serious, but we should be looking at this gas because you cannot smell it, you cannot see it. So it's easy for people to overlook it.
Right.
But the impact is there.
I mean, I can almost guarantee you that Scott Pruitt will do absolutely nothing.
Oh.
I mean, zero. Even if you could prove 100%, he still would not do anything. Because of unfortunately the current government that we're working under.
Yeah, because they believe it's not a problem. But Nigel, while talking about that global concentration, let me bring it locally to...
Yeah, but I think it's always good to talk globally.
Yep.
Because we've now got numbers that are going to scare people.
Yep.
Go for it.
So locally in Weld County, sometimes in 2011, I'm not privy to what was going on in the background, but I think somebody figured methane was a problem in Weld County. And they decided to put a test station in Platteville and in Denver. Personally, I have problem with those two locations because of the proximity. I would rather have another station where there's no oil and gas. But it would be interesting to tell you that the studies, I went through the data, averagely, the concentration in Denver was 2,303 parts per billion carbon. Compare that to 1,008 globally, that is already a problem. Now in Denver, we have 2,003 part per billion carbon. And if that is not scary enough, then when you now come to Platteville, the concentration is 2,944 part per billion carbon. That's in 2011. But something happened between that time where there was a regulation, which I have not studied pretty much, that mandated the oil and gas company to reduce the amount of methane that they vent into the atmosphere. And that number correlated in 2014, the number dropped from 2003 in Denver to about 2001. But there was we can say that little drop.
A small decline.
And that decline was also consistent in Platteville. You know, and people might be wondering why do you think it is more in Denver or Platteville than in the global consideration? In the whole state of Colorado, there's this oil and gas separation facility which is the biggest source of emission of methane by man. These are not natural. We vent these things, and through those facilities, we have in the whole state of Colorado 1,517 of such infrastructures, according to COGCC, and those were active infrastructure. So in Weld County alone, out of the 1,517, we have 1,248. So the impact will not be felt as much in Denver as it is in Weld County, and that's why you see the number in Platteville go up. So when I get elected, I would try and pass a legislation to actually have this test station in places where there's no oil and gas activity at all. I'm curious.
Somewhere up in the mountains?
Yeah, somewhere up in the mountain, just down like by the far west Colorado. And I want to see if that number will correlate with the global problem. And people can now see that the difference in Weld County specifically was because of this contribution from the oil and gas industry.
See, I'm just surprised that Denver is as high as it is, because typically here in Colorado, the winds blow east-west or west-east. We occasionally get a north-south, south-north, but those are normally fairly rare and normally due to a storm rather than the typical winds that we get here. So knowing that Denver is probably, 50 miles away from, say, Platteville, I'm just surprised at the concentrations that are happening in Denver. I'd have thought Denver would have been a lot lower.
Yeah, what I didn't look into is how many facilities they have in Denver. They probably have their own inputs. They probably have their own local reasons why the concentration is higher too in Denver. But I didn't look into that, and I won't really talk about that, but the proximity is very important.
Right, because methane is lighter than air, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it will go up in air.
Okay, because I was thinking Denver's in a bowl, so maybe they were getting concentrations that way, but that couldn't be the reason.
No, because the air will still carry it wherever. And this also brings into question about this debate that we are having about how close should we be drilling to school. But this issue we are talking about, even if you are not close, these things, once it gets into the atmosphere, it's going to travel.
Oh, yes.
It's going to travel to where you are. And whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or independent, if the effect begins to take place, it's going to catch us all. And that's why we as a people, citizens of Weld County, we need to collectively sit down and think through these things and begin to solve our problems locally. And one way we can do that is to begin to look for elected officials that really understand problems like this.
But I think if you push the facts, especially independent, verifiable facts, that'll go a long way to helping you.
Yeah.
But it really scares me that people are not paying attention to this particular issue. How far away can, say, a fracking station be from a development?
Yeah, because that push came from what people saw when the house exploded in Firestone. You know, the problem of Firestone is actually not so much of how close the wellhead is to the house. It's much more of how responsible are we with what we do.
Right.
Because it was actually a pipeline that carried the gas into the basement. So that wellhead could have been 1,000 miles away. And if that pipe is as that long and it's still going to that basement, that is going to happen. And yeah, if you keep that distance from a development, you keep that distance from a living development and a home, if there's an explosion on the site, yes, that the impact will be, can be contained, as opposed to when people are closer to it.
Right.
So that issue will be solved.
Have there been any incidents in Colorado of something going, very, very badly wrong at a fracking site?
Firestone is one good one. There was one that happened in the south where this gentleman built his house. His living room was in the middle of an abandoned old oil well.
Oh, my goodness.
He didn't know it was there, and that oil well somewhat started leaking, and the house exploded. But luckily, there was nobody in the house, and nobody died. And I was reading recently, there was another gentleman here in Fort Collins. His garage is actually sitting upon an abandoned well. Actually, his garage. So it's interesting. And these old wells, you really, if you are not told, you probably won't even know they are there.
What do they do when they finished with a site? I mean, do they concrete it over? How do they make it safe?
So if they want to abandon the well, they plug it with cement.
Okay.
And
to what sort of depth?
They plug it down to the depth. If that well is like 10,000 deep, they plug it as deep as it is.
Oh, wow.
And they leave it in place. But the problem is, in the days before regulations, these companies have the latitude to just plug it according to what they want. Nobody is really telling them how. And what we have found out over the time is some of this cement was leaking.
Yes.
Because they are not done to regulation. So, but wells that are currently plugged with the current regulations have a very big chance of withstanding any kind of pressure than the old wells. And the old wells are the problems we have currently as a potential danger to happen,
Is there a map where people can sort of look and see whether they may be in a possible dangerous situation?
Yes, COGCC has the map of all the wells that have been drilled in the state of Colorado. If you go to their website and if you look very well, you can see all the wells, both active and inactive.
Oh, okay. That's an important fact, because I don't think many people realize that.
Okay.
I mean, the old wells I had never thought of because the new wells are so obvious.
Yes.
So you don't think of, a little bit of concrete laying on the ground as being an issue, but it could be a bigger issue than the new wells.
Exactly. And most of the accidents has been coming from the old wells.
Yes.
Yes, and, those things leak as well. I also read somewhere that some scientists were actually going through the old wells to see the leaking potential, and they have demonstrated that a lot of these wells, old abandoned wells, leak because the pressure at which these gas are capped down, or because we've gone through and pierced through them, they want to come out. So, and if they are not having enough resistance, they will definitely come out.
Let's go back to something we talked about a little time ago. Okay, now, when you go to these, now, this doesn't happen where it's being fracked. This happens at a distribution center where they actually do start. What I'm talking about here is, because we have this picture.
Yes.
Okay, so this is not at the fracking site, this is somewhere else. So could you describe just quickly how this actually works outside of these four walls?
So people really pay attention to drilling and fracking because they can see the trucks, they can see the people, and they can hear the noise. But when these wells are drilled and fracked, they will run the pipeline under the ground and send them to a separation battery where all the oil and gas is collected and separated.
So it's not stored at the fracking site.
No, it's just close enough.
It goes to a distribution center.
Yeah, just for example, the house in Firestone, one of the flow lines that caused the accident was actually sent to a battery.
Ah.
And that's one of the pipelines that was the culprit. The flow lines, So when it gets to that separation center, that's where that's where a lot of the venting happens. And this facility is there 24 hours, 7 days. around the year.
Yeah, never stops.
It never stops, and the venting is happening. We don't see it. We don't hear the noise. We don't feel it until we begin to have an effect. The only way you can see this gas is if you carry an infrared camera that is calibrated to detect methane.
So when it comes to this, each one of these will be venting, or as Tom prefers to call it, legalized leaking. So these vents, about how much gas is it? I suppose it's different depending on what's coming out of the ground.
Yes, especially the older ones, because my understanding is with the newer technology, they have been trying to cut down the amount of vents that are coming out of this, but the older wells are venting consistently. But the volume, I don't think anybody has actually taken interest in measuring the volume. But the problem here is of 1,248 in Weld County, no matter how small the vent is, it's a lot. All you need to do is just look through your window. I can guarantee you, if you live in Weld County, in the district I'm trying to represent, you're going to see one of these facilities.
I know Weld County's just gone. They put them everywhere.
You know, and oil and gas is good. It's not like it's all bad news, because the reality is we don't have an alternative to this oil and gas. We still go to the gas station, we pump our gas, and this gas comes from this oil and gas. It produces a lot of jobs. We are not talking today about not having the activities, We're just talking about being a lot more responsible and more proactive about how we do and applying science, especially because there's solution. I was talking to you some times ago. I said a friend of mine came from Sweden. She migrated to the US and she got sick. And I said, why? She said, oh, because the US, she lives in Chicago, and she can't tell that the atmosphere is not as clean. And that got her sick. Now, she got to be sick for her body to get adjusted to the climate of the United States. And that interests me, but it doesn't surprise me, because Europeans are very much far away when it comes to taking the science serious. I mean, you probably will, you probably will agree with me on that one. We can do better here in the US.
It's not that we can, we must.
Yes, and we will.
We must do better when it comes to the sciences, and that's across the board. It really gets me going, because you have all of these Republicans that downcry science, yet everything around them was generated and created by science. And they just don't get it.
Science have done wonderful things.
Wonderful things, especially in medicine.
Yeah, and in other areas, like science was the reason why we have vehicles today. We used to ride on horses,
Yes.
And Nigel, the biggest problem I have is we elect people who don't have science backgrounds. I mean, I'm taking a huge risk here because I'm comfortable with my science. And the reason why a lot of scientists are not coming into politics is not lucrative. You need to have a particular passion for it.
Yes.
And because of that, I personally believe, I have 3 kids. They all live here in Weld County. There will come a time money will not be as important. So as a person, what can I do to contribute to help humanity, as it were? Beyond money, we are all human. We all have the same problem. We all suffer the same consequence of the effects of the atmosphere. People think it's about party or whether you are Republican or Democrat. No, it's about human. We need to take care of here because we have our children and our grandchildren that will live after. Like I just told you, our grandparents, their exposure to methane was 720. We are in Denver right now. We're in the dosage of 3,000.
Right.
We need to do something about it.
Now, obviously, in fairness to that, we've had a big increase in population, which means we've had a big increase in cows.
Yep.
And in humans and across the board. So some of that methane that's being generated is a natural methane. However,
yeah, that's true.
That's true. But it still doesn't account for the numbers that we talked about with Denver and Platteville being so high.
Let me bring a detail to you. Like Washington State, they don't have a lot of drilling activities. and they have been monitoring their methane, and they've put it to how big their cows are, and they're trying to do something about it. Washington State is trying to do something about cutting down methane through the cows.
Yes.
And we are here in Colorado. We are not talking about the cows here. We're talking about the methane that we contribute from the oil and gas.
Yes. Well, plus, of course, the fact that Weld County has one of the biggest slaughterhouses in America.
Yeah, but
so there's obviously, you know, lots of different things going on.
But
here.
we are talking about the
Yes.
difference we are talking about specifically. It's not.
Yes.
It's not from the cows.
So let's just recap a little bit.
Okay.
So on these new battery installations that they're putting in, they're trying to, feed back the methane into... They're trying to not vent it as they're doing it in the older stations?
I don't know exactly the technology that's been applied, but obviously there's a cutback in the venting, and that signals to me that we can actually cut that venting completely. But this will not be done except we are required. The companies are required legislatively to do this. I mean, they are required to cut it back, and they did. And that's why this new technology is put it in place.
Right.
I can guarantee you there's a lot of scientists that have been studying this for a long time. But
Yes.
in order for them to implement the results of their studies, we need elected officials that will pass the legislation and raise that standard. And we've done it before. We have done it with other pollution. I mean, this country is a lot better today with the regulations put in by EPA, especially to our environment, than it used to be. I mean, when you were younger, you probably burn coals in your homes. You go through the chimney, and we have seen that generation when they grew. A lot of them grew up with cancer. But today, a lot of us, we just sit down in our living room, we turn on the heat, and we don't have all those kind of pollution. I mean, we have taken care of. I mean, asbestos is another issue.
Right.
We saw the problem. We did something about it, and we reversed the trend. Yeah, we can do something about this. We just have to have the political will
To do it.
to do it.
Talking of the political will, why don't you spend a minute and tell people why they should vote for you?
Like I said, I'm Gbenga Ajiboye, running for House District 48. I think one of the biggest problem in Weld County, as we can see from this conversation, oil and gas is a big thing. So we need somebody who understands this industry, understands the science to represent the district. And beyond that, there are other issues that I care so much about. I'm available. I will listen. For example, I would urge all the voters to think about it. Do you even know the name of who is representing you currently? If you know the name, have you reached out to him? Has he responded to you? Or her? But I will say this, you go to my website, reach out to me, and I will reach back to you. When elected, I will do the same. I'm not saying we're going to agree all the time. Where we disagree, we're going to talk about it. Where we agree, we're going to talk about it. That's what it should be. But currently in Weld County, that's not what it is. So I'm running because I want to be your voice. I want to represent you. And it doesn't matter whether you are white, black, blue, green. We all have the same problems. And that problem is what we should be going after, and not other affiliation. So I urge the voters of Weld County to think about these facts. Are you voting because a person is a Democrat or Republican? Or are you voting because the person will actually represent your view and be there when you need them to be? Think about it. And I will do that when elected.
That's perfect. Gbenga, thank you very, very much for joining me here
Thank you
today
so
on
much.
Rational Fracking, as we're calling it.
Yes.
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about this very interesting area, and I know that we have conversations planned for the future where we'll start looking at other areas, some negative, some positive.
Yep.
You cannot hold back progress, you cannot hold back science.
Yes.
But sometimes you do need to step back and have a quick look and say, you know what, we can do that just a little bit better, a little bit safer, a little bit cleaner. And unfortunately, that seems to be a step that doesn't happen very often. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. There was a rational fracking for you, where we're talking about what is happening in Weld County, what is happening globally, interesting facts and figures. Please, 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 in any situation like this, don't take our word for it. Use the internet. You can look up all of this information. You will find it. It's really important that you understand what is happening in your area. And it doesn't matter if it's Weld County, Boulder County, Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, etc., etc., etc. You all need to see what is going on. We haven't even talked about the number of earthquakes that are now happening in Oklahoma. That's going to make a fascinating discussion. So once again, thank you very, very much for joining us here at the round table for a rational fracking. You are in the Captain's Lounge Studios, located here in wonderful Longmont. Take good care. Goodbye.